Hey, Stuart, we're back. Today, we're going to talk through Azure Active Directory, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's do it.
So I'm going to do Portal. I'm going to be the GUI clicker, and you're going to do it in a much more elegant, repeatable way. So we'll watch our little intro video and come back. Okay, so I'm going to flip over to my screen here, and where we keep all the docs is just aka.mswec OpenShift docs, which actually just take you to the root here. And I'm going down into configure Azure Active Directory through the GUI, through the portal. And so there's a couple things that that you need here. You need a running Arrow cluster, obviously, which Stuart has graciously this morning given to me as I've played with mine, and I have it doing an upgrade to a test channel. So that kind of went boom. So I've gone and got some stuff here for actually walking through this. And so essentially what there's a couple things that you need to do. You have to add in the OpenID Connect identity provider in Arrow cluster. And then on the Azure Active Directory side, essentially set up your OAuth callback URL and your web URI correctly.
Yeah, so, that might sound kind of daunting, but that's just some copy and paste, further down in the documentation, is it not?
Yeah. And so what we'll do here is first off, we'll go take a quick look over here at my Azure Active Directory. And so what I've got here is, let me grab Azure AD. So we can see here I've got my demo Azure Active Directory. It's just line.demo.microsoft. And I'm going to come down here and click on app registrations. This is just something you would create. So you can go ahead and hit new and create one. I've already created one here, so I'm just going to cheat and grab that. And the redirect URI and all the stuff that you need from the documentation is right here. So we're going to go ahead and copy some values. So we've got this created. Now the redirect URI here, we're going to go construct. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go look at that. We also need the client ID and the tenant ID, and then a secret. So I'm going to come over here, grab the client ID, and grab my tenant ID. And then I'm also going to come down here and generate a secret to be used for this. So let's come over here, demo AD. We'll go ahead and grab a secret here. So now I have the things that I need. The other thing in the documentation is just optional claims. And what this does is it makes sure that your claims order that come back from AD are in a better order, so that way things work better when on the OpenShift side. I know it's a very hand-wavy way of explaining that. And so what that looks like here is token configuration. You essentially just have to add an optional claim of email and pop it in, and it'll pop to the top, and you're kind of done there. And so let's come down here. And we used to have a string here that had the full redirect UI for you. There we go. Where did that go, Stuart? Maybe we keep it in this one.
The redirect URI, it was the window that you just had there. It actually generates it out of all of the variables that it's setting. So it looks like it's pulling info out of the cluster and then subsequently setting it that way.
But since I'm using your cluster, my Azure CLI won't have access to that.
Right. So you're going to have to do some fancy copy and replace, but basically that OAuth callback URL down at the bottom, the start of it is going to be the same. You'll just have to replace the cluster domain name as well as the Azure Data Center name and follow the same format. You should be good to go.
So let me cheat here. Let's see. And go grab a URL from another cluster that I have.
Hey, why reinvent the wheel? I'm all about that.
Yep. And so this is, grab this.
Yep. But you see the format's the same as in the docs. The only thing is the domain name and the data center name would potentially change depending on, well, the domain name would definitely change, and the data center name could change depending on where you deploy it.
Okay, so almost there. I'll grab my web URI here. Yeah, sorry, you're right. I'm thinking of the secondary one that goes in the OpenShift cluster. That's what I was thinking. That had the tenant ID. So this is just going to be. So let's come back over here to Notepad. And so the cluster that you gave me is here, and it is in East US. So that East US still applies. So let's go.
Looks good. Yep.
And let's go back over to redirect URI. Looks like I've got a couple old ones in there, so let's go ahead and add this one in. So that's the one that you gave me. Let's go ahead and save that. So now
why are we doing this, Lab? We're granting permission for that cluster to access the service principal, correct?
Yeah. So what this means is that when the identity provider on the OpenShift cluster says, "Hey, I'm redirecting my user over to Azure Active Directory," and then Azure Active Directory sees that request coming in and says, "Hey, I know this is the fully qualified path that it's coming from the OpenShift cluster." Now, yes, that is something that I will trust essentially as a provider, as an RP, right? A relying party to my identity provider on the AAD side. And it's tricky to get those things right in my head.
Yep, that's it. Good.
So go ahead.
No, you're good. I was just saying that's it. Perfect.
And so now that we've done that, we can come over to configuring the OpenShift cluster. And so if we come down here, well, obviously I've already cheated and got the kubeadmin credentials from Stuart. So if we come down here to the dashboard and we go down to of course, it logged me out when I was fiddling around with kubeadmin. Okay, quick and easy way to get to it. So if we go down to this, let's go through the GUI way. So here we go down to Admin Cluster Settings Global Configuration tab. Cluster Global Configuration, and then we should see something down here for authentication. And where's add? Why am I failing on this?
Are you looking for authentications or OAuth setup?
OAuth, yeah, I was. Add identity. There we go. It's under identity providers, right?
There we go. OAuth. Beautiful.
So we're going to add an OpenID Connect. So we've got to give it a name here. And so I did notice I put in a dash, or I don't know if it was a dash, but I put in a space once. Don't do that. That does not work well. Spaces do not work well on this. So the client ID and client secret is what we grabbed from AD. So our client ID here. And our secret for the app. And then for the issuer URL, this is down here. So if we grab this, and replace our tenant ID here.
Now, while you're doing this copy and pasting, I definitely want to point out that on the other screen where you specified the name AAD, if you do decide to call it something else, albeit without a space, you have to make sure you change that OAuth reply URL. You see how you have AAD at the end there? That maps over to whatever that is, 2 lines up. So if you change it from something other than capital AAD, make sure you change it on that reply URL as well.
Yeah, that's a good call out, because that's another easy way to kind of trip up, and I'm not sure that the error messages are going to give you that easy thing. And then the preferred username here is what we're going to grab from one of the claims that we put in. So we're going to go ahead and here and pop in UPN. So we've got UPN name and email, and that's it. And so at this point we hit add. It's going to sit here for a minute. and in probably 30 seconds to a minute, maybe two, you will actually see it when you log out. You will actually go see a secondary login option, and so it's still propagating across the masters at this point. But if we come back in a minute or two, we'll see you can either pick kubeadmin or AAD. So what we can do is we can flip over to yours, Stuart, because I know yours is going to take a few minutes, and we can either stay here for 30 seconds to a minute, or we can just flip over to yours and come back.
Yeah, let me go ahead and share out here, and we will switch over to the CLI. All right, you got me?
Yep.
Okay, so the script that I'm using here, arrow4-build.sh, I think I referred to this in the last video we did, Lyle, with deploying OpenShift. And so I'm just using this exact same script. It's going to pull in a bunch of information that it needs to deploy an Arrow cluster, and I've gone ahead and let it run. And I subsequently have a cluster stood up and ready to go. At this point, I'm going to go ahead and use another script that I've generated to actually perform all of the things that Lyle has done in a very quick and expedient way. So that script is called arrow4-aad-connect.sh. And if I go ahead and just run that without any switches, it tells me I need to specify the Arrow cluster name as well as the resource group name. So let's go ahead and do that. So the cluster name and the resource group name. And so I'm going to go ahead and hit enter here, and it's going to tell me that if the Arrow cluster uses a custom domain, the console and app addresses must resolve prior to running the script. So if you are using custom DNS, make sure that you have your A records set up prior to running this script, because it will call them out and try to resolve them as part of its data gathering. So I'm going to go ahead and hit 1 to go ahead and continue. Then what we'll do is we'll look at some of the formal documentation and then come back and test to make sure that this thing actually works. So as you can see here, the script is going and pulling a whole bunch of variables. You remember at the top of the docs section that Lyle showed, it was setting a bunch of variables. So this script is going to do all of that for you. And then it's going to go run through, create the authentication provider in OpenShift, and then subsequently push in the config as needed for Azure Active Directory.
It's also, how is it grabbing those variables? Is that using the Azure CLI with that query parameter with the -tsv to basically allow you to go grab specific things and throw it into environment variables, or are you doing something else?
Nope, that's exactly what it's doing. It's using the AZ CLI and setting all those variables behind the scenes. I don't have the query TSV set up, but what I am doing is just using JQ. So 6 or half dozen of the other. I like JQ. I'm used to it. So, but you can absolutely use -o TSV and then do like a JMES path query as well. So you see it's gone ahead and created a manifest for the Azure application as well as the service principal. And so the manifest, again, that is just the Arrow authentication provider. It will log into the Arrow cluster to make sure that it has admin access, and then subsequently push in the secret that it auto-generates for you, as well as the revised authentication provider config. And then it cleans up after itself because it generates a couple of test files. So I'm going to go ahead and jump over here to the actual documentation. And this is for the CLI. So this is looking very similar to what Lyle had just shown you. However, this is command line only. So a lot of the commands are going to be very similar. So domain, location, API service. So all of these variables, Lyle, you just called out a second ago, how are those being set? And very much the same way as you see here on the screen, happening behind the scenes for you automatically. This is for creating the actual service principal. Again, this is done behind the scenes for you. The IDs, of course, are recorded into variables. So basically all the stuff that it's asking you to write down, I have it automatically set in variables, so you don't have to worry about that. The manifest file, this is the OAuth provider for OpenShift that's going to be pushed into the OpenShift config, and then subsequently updating the app with the reply URLs and other information that it needs. Again, all of this is done behind the scenes. Listing the credentials and logging into the Arrow cluster. We saw that again just a moment ago using OC login, which is right here. So again, I'm basically stepping through all of these commands in the script for you and saving you the trouble of having to write all of these things down that it asks you to copy and paste. Subsequently, it will create the authentication provider agent and push that up into Arrow as well. And then at this point, you can test your config. So let's just have a look at the script here. And if you do want to download it, my GitHub is Stewart@Microsoft, and the repo is Azure.Arrow. There's whatever I'm working on at the time. I've pushed stuff up in there. There's some build scripts and some pull secret scripts and things like that. So feel free to go in and take the content that you might like. But as you can see here, it expects two inputs, the cluster name and the resource group name, which is what we saw. Lyle here is all of your callouts for setting those variables, all in here. And then subsequently creating the manifest, creating the service principal and assigning the appropriate permissions to it as required by the documentation. Logging into the Azure, not the Azure Linux, the OpenShift console through the API. Creating the authentication secrets file, creating the AAD provider. So that's when you went into global config OAuth and added the provider called AAD. And remember, this name right here on line 126 will translate into that reply URL, which should have already been set for us. It sets the variables. So remember, you did a copy and paste of the tenant ID. Again, I set that as a variable. So, again, another thing you don't have to copy and paste. And then subsequently pushing that config up into Arrow and then cleaning up after itself. So let's jump back over here to the shell. And I'm just going to go ahead and open this URL. And hopefully I see an option for logging in with AAD, which I do. Certainly, you can delete this kubeadmin user if you like, and then it will actually just log you right in at that point. Kubeadmin is, kind of like the backdoor account, if you will, to log in with cluster admin access. Up to you whether you want to delete it, but just clicking on AAD, I'm going to get a box that comes up prompting me to accept the permissions for the connector service principal that I've set up. And then once I do that, we should be logged into the cluster. And so here we go. I'm logged in as a generic user. I can then subsequently create a project and be all set to go at that point. Certainly, if I'm a cluster admin user, I can go ahead and assign different user level permissions to this account that I've set up now that I have logged in. That account does exist. But that is essentially it, Lyle.
Sweet. So let's check on mine, and then we'll talk about a couple of things that I've done for some of us here in our Microsoft team. So this is the cluster. So mine's up and running on AD. So if I come over here and hit AD, obviously I need to pop in the information around my account that I was using, and so this is just a user in my tenant.
Are you sharing your screen out loud?
Oh, thought I was. Oh, yeah. I actually have to hit the button.
There we go. So
it actually, asked me to change my password. So we're going to do the graceful thing in here and just put in add a number at the end. And so you can see I just logged in as test.lyle. I've downloaded on Microsoft, and yeah, sure, we'll stay signed in even though I'm in private. So now, boom, I'm in my cluster too. And so it's funny is, as we were working on this with some of our field teams, trying to say like, hey, look, obviously you have cluster admin now. And so we were trying to figure out, hey, what's a quick and easy way if you're just spinning up an Arrow cluster for a couple of people to go play around with, what are some things that you could do easily on this? And so one of the things that we did was just went and, obviously I'm signed in with that account, which doesn't have the permissions. But if I was to go back and sign in as kubeadmin, so let's actually go ahead and do this right now. One of the things that we did for some of us, obviously not the best practice for a production environment, but we just went over here and created a new cluster role binding and said, admin for all, for a few days, and this is just something that we did that, made it so, hey, look, we need a cluster. We want to go hack on some stuff. This is just something that we're not doing as a global thing. So, we're doing it short term, but just to get people to be able to play around for a little bit. And this is a really quick way to do this. So if you just give it whatever name you want, like, hey, this is super bad, in production, but if you just need a cluster and you need a couple people that be able to hack away with it for a few days, or just be able to log in and see what Arrow looks like and make it easier for people, just give them cluster admin and the group is system authenticated. And so what this means at this point, when you create this cluster role binding, and once it's propagated, if I log in as an authenticated user, so somebody in my tenant, when I come back in, as long as this is applied here, you'll see, hey, I can go and do everything that I couldn't do before. So, just a nice quick, not production, but you've got a couple of people that are trying to figure out what Arrow is, or getting used to it, or you've got a couple of devs and you've got a local cluster that you want not as your pre-prod or your prod, but this is our cluster that we're just going to go hack and go hack away at it until we start to actually get to the point where, okay, let's go make sure we're doing projects, make sure we're doing role bindings for projects and for groups, and actually setting up your fallback. I found this was just a quick and easy way to make sure that, hey, a couple of people want to go play with an Arrow cluster, give them this. If they blow it up, like you said, it's a quick rebuild of a cluster, and then you can go run a script like you have, and you're up and running.
Kind of sounds like a chmod 777.
Yes,
kind of gets
that is definitely the equivalent of chmod 777 for
kind of gets the hair on the back of my neck standing up there,
Yes, a couple of people I've set this up for, like, that is not the way to. I'm like, yes, this is just for when you're tinkering around, and you want people to be able to tinker easily. So,
excellent.
Well, thanks, Stuart.
Appreciate it, Lau. Yeah, I think we've covered this both from the graphical interface as well as the command line, and hopefully that gets anyone watching this well on your way to getting connected to your Azure Active Directory.
Yeah, and I think this. Let's to be clear. So this allows you to authenticate. It does not set up like group sync or using AAD groups as groups in OpenShift and things like that. To do that, there are some other things you have to do. Correct?
Yep, that's right. Mm-hmm.
But this allows you to go ahead and log into the cluster, and then you can kind of go set up cluster role bindings from here, and you could actually go look when you see that user, they actually show up in there. So you can go ahead and take that user and that user's ID and map it to groups inside of the OpenShift cluster, and at least do that.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome.
Perfect.
Thanks.
Cool.
We'll see you on the next one.
All right. Yeah, let's do a video on maybe, I don't know, pull secrets or custom SSL certificates. I mean, lots of things we can do. So excited for what we have coming up.
Yeah. Awesome. We'll
Thanks,
see you
Lyle.
soon.